Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Dear friends, that is the thing that I take away from these conferences. Friends, new friends, old friends, friendships reinforced, friendships on a personal level, on an organizational level, on a diplomatic level, stronger, lasting friendships forged at these conferences and during a few days of opportunities to sit down and talk about real business. Where does it go from here? That is what this forum is about. It's about the future. It is not about the past. We have the foreign ministers of Turkey and we have the foreign minister of the Netherlands here talking about stronger cooperation with regard to the humanitarian effort in Syria. We will hear more about that in the days to come, perhaps from our two distinguished guests in just a moment, but we are here looking at what happens from now on. The way this is going to work is I will invite the Foreign Minister of Turkey, Mr. Cavusoglu, to come to the stage in just a moment, sir. And then I will ask Stef Blok after that to join us on the stage. They will both make what are considered to be the keynote addresses to this conference. And then we will have a little chance to ask a couple of questions. Foreign Minister, if you would like to go to the podium, and then when you've finished, please come and join me here.
Thank you.
Very nice to see you. Please do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, dear Minister Blok, I am honored to address this forum once again this year. I had the pleasure and honor to be here last year as well. Therefore, I congratulate TRT World for this excellent traditional organization. And I am pleased to be speaking along my dear colleague, Minister Blok. We had very fruitful discussions yesterday in Ankara, and we agreed to work harder to fulfill the gap in past 2 years and look forward. And it is indeed now time to look forward. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, exploring a just peace in a fragmented world is a very timely topic. The world is indeed very much fragmented, and most of the institutions in the world, and we are members, are under risk. Terrorism, irregular migration, humanitarian crisis, poverty, and xenophobia and hatred are on the rise, and inequalities are everywhere. Without addressing inequalities, we cannot talk about social justice anywhere, neither in Turkey nor in neighborhood or beyond. And international organizations fail to deal with the actual threats. Geopolitics is back, prevention is weak, and conflict resolution is even weaker. It seems that the country who was the pioneer in establishing the current international system is now attacking it. That country is even attacking its own friends and allies. I am very much disappointed to see that the trade wars have become a reality. Unilateral and protectionist measures harm free and fair trade and rules-based trading system in the world. And these affect all countries, particularly the developing ones. And unilateral measures are also increase the inequality gap. Failed states, instabilities, lack of resources help radicals and terrorists in recruiting the particularly youth. Peace and prosperity in developed parts of the world cannot be sustained when the rest of the humanity is suffering from hunger and poverty. That's why we need to ensure peace for all and prosperity for all. That means there is need to adopt a win-win approach and reform the rules-based international system. Strengthening international institutions is an important aspect of this agenda, and the UN must fulfill its global role to serve humanity. And the UN's structure, working methods, as well as procedures, rules of procedures, must be reformed to better respond to the global challenges. That is the expectation of our societies today. And we support UN Secretary General's pledge in that respect. And the reform should also include the UN Security Council system. That's why my president has been emphasizing and underlining that world is bigger than 5. It's not an empty motto. And the United Nations should be reformed itself. And UN is not meeting the expectation of today's world. Forget about the UN. Our regional organizations are also not meeting the expectations of our societies in Europe particularly. And European Union is one of them. Therefore, European Union and the Council of Europe and the OSCE and the others should also reform themselves. When I was president of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, the reform was my priority. It was the priority at the same time of the Secretary General, who is still Secretary General of the organization, Torbjörn Jagland. And we didn't reform only the Parliamentary Assembly, but even the European Court of Human Rights, and which is more effective right now. Therefore, reform is an ongoing process. We need to continue reforming these organizations. And while we are facing all these problems in our neighborhood, Turkey cannot just sit back and watch. Therefore, the principle of today's Turkish foreign policy is enterprising and humanitarian foreign policy. And we must take initiatives and employ hard and soft instruments of power to implement the enterprising and humanitarian foreign policy in our neighborhood and beyond. And we take active roles in prevention and peaceful resolutions of the conflicts. Syria is one example, and the immediate example. The deal, the memorandum that we signed with Russians on Idlib didn't only prevent the humanitarian catastrophe, but also prevented another mass flow of migrants to the Turkish border as well as towards Europe. And now there is another window of opportunity for political solution. Without Idlib deal, we wouldn't be able to do that, because otherwise there will be no opposition and there will be no negotiations between the opposition and the regime for constitution or for a political solution, which is the best solution for Syria. Now we have been encouraging all our partners to pay more attention to the political process. I'm going to see Stefan after this meeting, and he is trying to establish the Constitutional Committee. There are 3 lists of opposition, regime, and civil society. And it has to be a balanced one. I know some countries are trying to change this balance in favor of the regime, but it doesn't work like this. We are talking about the future of our country. Therefore, this is the, last window of opportunity, to my mind, for the political solution in Syria, and we have to take the advantage of that. And now, what's happening in Iraq, to my mind, I think they are on the right track. They have elected their speaker, they have elected their president recently, and now it is time to form the government. But after formation of the government, we should continue supporting this country and in their fight against terrorism, including PKK and Daesh and the others. But we need to rebuild this country. And Turkey is the biggest sponsor now. We pledged $5 billion during the Kuwait conference. But Syria and Iraq are not only the problematic countries in our neighborhood. Look what's happening in Yemen and what will happen in Libya. And I have been trying to convince my European friends that any kind of impact of the situation in Yemen to Europe, the continent, will be more than it is on Turkey. Therefore, we should continue supporting the efforts of the United Nations. Salama is doing a great job, but he deserves more support and concrete support from ourselves. But in our region also, look at the north, Crimea, eastern part of Ukraine. And we have so many fragile regions like Western Balkans. Now, after the referendum in Macedonia, we are at the eve of the elections in Bosnia, and the recent tension between Kosovo and Serbia are a source of concern for all of us. And we have also so many frozen conflicts in our neighborhood. Nagorno-Karabakh is one of them. Now Ossetia, South Ossetia and Abkhazia also became another frozen conflicts. Even Crimea and Transnistria. And Cyprus is another problem, that the solution has been frozen. We tried last year our best in Grand Montana and Geneva, it didn't work. Now we are talking with everybody, all the actors, including the Greek Cypriots informally, to find out what we are going to negotiate next. And the framework of the negotiations, of course, because we cannot afford another failure. Therefore, Turkey has been doing its best to strengthen the stability in Western Balkans through our trilateral mechanisms between Turkey, Bosnia and Serbia, Turkey, Bosnia and Croatia. Now we are planning to have the quadrilateral one, Turkey, Bosnia, Serbia and Croatia. And in the Caucasus as well, through trilateral and quadrilateral mechanisms between Turkey, Azerbaijan, in Iran, between Turkey, Georgia and Azerbaijan, and Turkey, Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan, now maybe Kazakhstan as well. It's not about just meeting between these countries. You have seen the concrete projects that we have realized all together and helping us to not only strengthen the stability in the region, but also economic development through all these pipelines and also railway projects. So, besides these mechanisms, mediation for peace is another initiative of Turkey and with other partners. We have been co-chairing Friends of Group of Mediation together with Finland at the United Nations and the OSCE. And now, as the term presidency of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the mediation initiative has been also enhanced, and we had our first ministerial meeting during the UN General Assembly last week in New York. And the friends of all these three groups are increasing. We are very grateful to all the countries and the NGOs and international organizations supporting such initiatives. Of course, peaceful solution of all the conflicts is essential, but we need to focus on also the root causes of the problems and the conflicts. Therefore, to face or deal the root causes of the problems, humanitarian assistance and the solving the problems of the people where they are living is so essential. And Turkey has been very successful in that regard. And I am, so honored to repeat that Turkey is the most generous country in the world right now. Our humanitarian and development assistance reach $8.1 billion in 2017. And second is United States, and their humanitarian and development assistance amounted $6.7 billion. In 2016, they were at the top, and with $6.3 billion. And our humanitarian assistance was $6 billion in 2016. So you can see the achievements and the progress that we have made. And we will continue supporting the vulnerable people in all over the world. And we have spent $32 billion for the Syrian refugees, only Syrian refugees living in Turkey, not the others. And we have another more than 500,000 refugees and migrants from different parts of the world, from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, from African countries, and even beyond. Now we are signing the readmission agreements with the source countries. That is another story. But here, what I am trying to say that migration is one of the challenges that we are facing today. Even though we don't have world war today, more than 65 million people had to leave their homes for this reason or that reason. Forcibly, some of them. But now they face other problems where they are living now. Anti-refugee and immigrants' sentiments are also on the rise. So we witness negative, hostile, and misguided sentiments towards migrants and refugees in all over the world. Not only in the transit countries, I mean the Eastern European countries or Western Balkan countries or Greece, but in all over Europe and all over the world, I can say. Of course, it is a security issue, but if you look at this issue only from the security point of view, we will be misled. We should also look at this problem from the humanitarian point of view. Only then we can understand. Nevertheless, we have to deal with this problem, and no country can alone solve this problem. Therefore, full cooperation is essential. That is exactly what we are doing right now with European Union and European countries and the transit countries with Greece. And it has three aspects. We need to prevent irregular migration. To do so, first we have to fight smugglers. And we have made a lot of achievements there. And more than 26,000 smugglers we have captured in Turkey. In Istanbul, in Izmir, also along the coast, Aegean coast mainly, and also in Edirne region. And we should promote controlled migration. This is exactly what we are doing with the European Union, controlled migration. And despite all these problems and the opposition of the many leadership in Europe, thanks to the Madam Merkel's leadership, and also Prime Minister Rutte, we signed this agreement during the Dutch presidency of the European Union Commission. EU has resettled almost 20,000 Syrians in return to what we receive from Greek island. Now, Greece has some problems to send them back. That is their own problem, but now it's also affecting the other host countries. Nevertheless, we need to deal with this. But we shouldn't forget that even today and tomorrow, and particularly in the next 10 years, 20 years, European countries will need more migrants because of the aging problem. Therefore, we should continue our cooperation. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I need to leave some more time for my friend. So to sum up, we have been, by the way, late. Sorry for that. It is not our fault. We left Ankara on time. We landed in Istanbul on time. And the traffic from airport to here was okay, but the traffic in Istanbul, at the airport was terrible. That's why we need the new airport, the biggest airport desperately. So it's also related to the migration problem, but it's not limited with the migrants. We need to deal another big challenge in our countries, in Europe, which is xenophobia, racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, any sort of phobia, I mean. They are all on rise. And maybe Stef can tell us more, because one political party in his country is increasing its support at every election, and they have to deal with that. But the problem is, we see the shift of the position of the mainstream political parties. I mean, even social democrat parties or conservative parties in many European countries. And if you don't, you pay at the elections, you pay the cost, like Madame Merkel did, and like the coalition partner Social Democrats in Germany did. And AfD is gaining their support, I mean increasing their support. Let's see how many seats they will get at the European Parliament elections in May. Well, this is the problem that we need to deal. That's why, to face all these problems, I think we need better Turkey-EU relations. And to do so, we need to create more positive atmosphere. This is exactly what we are doing now. Particularly after unilateral acts and decisions of the United States, we more defend multilateralism, but effective multilateralism. For effective multilateralism, we need better cooperation. And now we have better opportunity, more opportunities, new opportunities to strengthen our ties with the European Union and the EU member states, including the Netherlands. And I'm very happy that we are normalizing our relations, and we look forward. And we have been working together with the Netherlands in many areas, particularly in counterterrorism. And we co-chair the Counterterrorism Forum, as well as the forum in anti-Daesh coalition, the forum of, sorry, I couldn't remember, foreign terrorist fighters. Because we need to deal with this issue as well, and we need better intelligence and information sharing, and the timely one to actually prevent foreign terrorist fighters flow to the destination where there are civil wars or the way back to source countries. Therefore, I would like to thank Stef here in front of you for his good visit and the good talks that we have been having since he arrived. Thank you very much.
Having heard from Mr. Cavusoglu, I would like to invite Mr. Blok. Where? Seem to have lost you, sir. Yeah. Do come up either way. And there will be a chance for me to ask, I think time is pressing, just a couple of questions.
Where can I sit?
Please sit here. I shall grab that seat there. And when...
I don't mind. Yeah.
Please, no, you sit there.
Okay.
Thank you. Very pleased to see you, sir. Normalized. That's fantastic. And there'll be a couple of questions afterwards.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like first of all to thank my friend Mevlut Cavusoglu for inviting me for this important forum today. It is a great honor to be here in the margins of our bilateral visit. We've had a number of productive and in-depth conversations on many topics. Turkey is indeed privileged to have such an experienced foreign minister, the broad knowledge of both foreign policy and the European Union. The relations between Turkey and the Netherlands go back more than 400 years. Indeed, the Dutch were one of the first countries to have a diplomatic presence here in Istanbul. Like any long relationships, we've had our ups and downs, but it's a relationship that has stood the test of time. But I was not invited here to talk about our bilateral issues. I was asked to speak about global affairs, and to be more precise, about achieving just peace in a fragmented world. That's quite a challenging and broad topic, as I'm sure you will all agree. But of course, I'm more than happy to oblige. And I'd like to begin with the second half of the phrase, a fragmented world. It isn't hard to show that the world is fragmented, especially before this distinguished audience of experts on international affairs. So that part of my analysis can be brief. You are all very well aware of the facts. But let me briefly cite some of the key forms of fragmentation we've seen in today's world and limit myself to 5 main points. The first, after 2 decades of unipolarity, we now live in a multipolar world with economic power shifting towards the East and the South as old alliances try to adapt to the new reality. It's a world where multilateralism and the system of international cooperation set up after World War II are under pressure, and where the principle of might makes right is consequently in danger of gaining the upper hand. It's a world where states are no longer the single dominant factors at play. Non-state actors are growing more and more influential, and the rise of ISIS is a harrowing example of this. And Turkey has borne a disproportionately heavy burden in this regard, unfortunately. Second, it's a world where classic threats remain, but new, often undetectable hybrid threats have entered the mix. Cyber threats, meddling by foreign actors, and fake news, to name but a few. Third, we live in a world where people have become increasingly mobile. And this has benefited many, but it can lead to disruptive, irregular migration patterns when not handled responsibly. And Turkey knows this all too well, as host to an astonishing 3.5 million Syrian refugees, with all challenges this entails. And we truly appreciate this tremendous humanitarian effort. And by relocating refugees to the Netherlands and providing financial support to the EU facility for refugees in Turkey, we are happy we can help in this effort. Fourth and lastly, this is a world where all levels of society and government are interconnected and sometimes collide, where geopolitics can enter all of our homes at a swipe of the screen, where the distinction between external and internal politics has completely disappeared. And I'm sure we could add some other equally important elements to this list, like climate change and the global rise of populist movements. But as a politician, rather than as a scholar, I won't be trying to be exhaustive. Now that we've established that the world is indeed fragmented, I'd like to move on to how we can best deal with this phenomenon. This brings me back to the proposition I was asked to discuss here, achieving just peace. And just peace. It sounds simple, doesn't it? 2 little words. Yet they represent the most precious thing we have. And the hardest to achieve too. Because how can we achieve it? Let me run through 5 elements that I and my country believe are essential in our fragmented world. I come from a small, open and wealthy country that is heavily dependent on trade. Trade with our partners, both close and far away. A country that remembers the devastation of at least 1 world war and the pain of decades of rebuilding. A country that has had first-hand experience of what happens when the international order breaks down. And a country that, like many others, has a tremendous interest in preserving international law and rules-based international legal order. And when I say rules-based international order, I mean that in the broad sense of the term, encompassing all various structures of international corporations that benefit us so greatly. Structures of cooperation where countries come together because they prefer to meet in conference halls rather than on the battlefield. and because they believe in working together towards common goals. For Europe, this has resulted in peace through integration. For NATO, this has meant peace through pooling resources and common defense. And for the United Nations, this has led to peace through cooperation and the development of a rules-based international order. Or, as the UN Charter rightly puts it, the conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained. My country has invested heavily in promoting a rules-based international order, since as far back as the days of Hugo Grotius, and as host to the Hague Peace Conferences, the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, and other key international legal institutions, the Netherlands has a proud tradition of championing international law. And indeed, it is enshrined in our constitution. And on that, ladies and gentlemen, it's not merely an interesting historical fact, nor is it an idealistic notion. It is, on the contrary, a highly realistic aim. And I consider myself a realist, and I strongly believe that, now more than ever, a dependable, rule-based legal order is essential for security, stability, and economic growth. And when respected, such an order is our best guarantee for prosperity and the best available tool to conflict prevention. This is no less true in this day and age. As the Roman writer Vegetius observed in his Re Militaris Institutia, if you want peace, prepare for war. And unfortunately, that principle is also true today. A realist like me cannot help but concede that a just peace sometimes requires more than just simply talk. We need to be ready, when all other options are exhausted, to use other means than words. We need to be ready to exert real pressure, to hit an opponent where it hurts. After all, by imposing punitive sanctions, the world forced North Korea back to the negotiating table. And in some cases, we even have to be ready to take the kind of steps we're all working hard to avoid. The threat of military action is sometimes enough. Deterrence is a major component of defense. But sometimes it's necessary to go even further. When all options have exhausted and our very existence is threatened, the use of military force cannot be ruled out. In extreme cases, we have to be ready to take up arms, even if we don't want to. The threat of ISIS was such a case. A 79-member coalition joined forces and managed to defeat an apocalyptic army of 30,000 fighters that was causing havoc in Iraq and Syria. And as a result, ISIS now has almost no territory left. We don't want to play the military card, but we must be prepared to as a last resort. This implies a need to invest in our security, in our military personnel and capabilities. In an uncertain geopolitical context, increased expenditure on defense is necessary to ensure stability, as agreed at the NATO summit in Wales. And Turkey, as a key NATO ally, knows better than anyone. The Netherlands is working towards this commitment, and for its part, Turkey is one of the only of a handful of allies that has already fulfilled the Wales commitments. So I commend you for it. And Turkey, like the Netherlands, shoulders its security responsibility in the NATO alliance. Since 2001, our soldiers have stood shoulder to shoulder in Afghanistan to prevent this troubled country from falling back into instability. So, just peace and security go hand in hand. But I also want to highlight the importance of rules. Even in cases where we have no other option than to take up arms, there are rules that we must follow. In order to have just peace, our use of force must also be just. We must abide by the laws of armed conflict. And even in situations of conflict, the principles of international humanitarian law must be fully respected. This brings me to my third point. Predictability breeds confidence, and confidence is the most vital component of international relations. This should never be taken for granted, certainly not in this day and age, when some seem to think they can deny its importance without consequences. Building confidence takes hard work, persistence and long view. It often occurs behind the scenes where so much useful work is being done. Building confidence is the work of all of you here, and I commend you for it. Building confidence in international relations take many different forms in many different arenas. I mentioned the European Union, NATO and United Nations, but also forums like the Global Counterterrorism Forum, where 29 countries work together to tackle a shared challenge. And consider, for example, the success of the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA. Europe has stuck to the agreement that was reached. And consider also the importance of solid and predictable trade agreements with level playing field. In the WTO framework, countries refrain from taking unilateral steps because in the long run, it's not in anyone's interest to damage the hard-fought level playing field. Building confidence by being predictable also means honoring the old principle of pacta sunt servanda. Rules are to be respected, internally and externally in relation to our partners. And for a country like the Netherlands, as a member of so many international forums, this means that you can count on your allies. And a clear example of this was when we provided Patriot missiles for the Turkish border to protect Turkey against attacks from Syria. And it means not shying away from reform, but reform must be constructive and moving with the organization, not against it. But the ultimate goal of making the organization better. And this goes for the UN and of course also for the EU and for NATO. And it means that we must be prepared to address difficult questions. In regional bodies like the European Union, we must be especially strict about issues like budgetary discipline and to ensure that there are consequences when it is not observed. It also means being consistent about accession criteria, strict and fair. And this principle is true for migration as well. We will respect the UN Refugee Convention, but we will also honor our agreements on the return of irregular migrants. And finally, predictability also entails respect for human rights and their universality. And I would like to stress there can be no pause button for this principle. There is another element of just peace that my own nation's history of post-war reconstruction has demonstrated. It is a simple paradigm which may sound familiar coming from a Dutch foreign minister because we've been saying it consistently for so long. There can be no lasting peace without justice. We can cite the Nuremberg trials, for example, of how justice can enable post-war society to rebuild, confront traumas and heal wounds. And decades later, after the devastating Balkan Wars, the same can be said of the ICTI, the special tribunal that we proudly hosted in The Hague. Just as we've proudly hosted many other international legal institutions, special courts, and of course the International Criminal Court. This is an area where we have long invested heavily in, because without justice there can be no peace. It's not an empty maxim, it's a hard-fought lesson. And for this reason, accountability has been one of our priorities during our UN Security Council membership. Whether in Syria, Myanmar, Yemen, or elsewhere, fact-finding, investigation, and attribution are essential elements in the chain of accountability. They send a clear message to the victims. Justice may not be swift, but it will eventually be done. And it also sends a clear message to the perpetrators. Impunity will not prevail, and you risk suffering the consequences of your actions. And this is why I won't stop calling on the Security Council to refer the most serious crimes to the International Criminal Court. In that connection, I welcome the recent announcement that the International Criminal Court's prosecutor has opened an investigation into the forced displacement of the Rohingya people from Myanmar. Together with Kuwait, the Netherlands has put a lot of effort into holding accountable those responsible for the atrocities there. And in this regard, I commend Turkey for its leadership in giving the Rohingya such a prominent place on the world agenda. I believe that the International Criminal Court is one of the most important instruments we have for ending impunity and achieving accountability. And for that reason, as many countries as possible should become party to the Rome Statute. With 127 free states, a majority of the international community has signed up. But there are still too many states outside the fold. The important role Turkey has played in highlighting the plight of the Rohingya shows that Turkey should also be part of the International Criminal Court family. For that reason, I would again like to urge our Turkish friends to join the ICC. This way we can work together even more effectively to combat atrocities like those taking place in Myanmar. My fifth and last point is also about accountability. Because, of course, accountability is not an end in itself. It's one of the elements that makes reconciliation possible, and it is reconciliation that enables a wounded society to tap into its reserves of resilience and look to the future again, to move forward, to rebuild. That takes hard work and a lot of courage. It takes people who are willing and able to do the impossible in the toughest of times. Look at Syria, the suffering and the devastation. Today, it seems hard to imagine that someday Syrians will be able to look to the future again. Fortunately, history has shown us that this is indeed possible. Just look at the examples of Europe after World War II, South Africa after apartheid, Rwanda after the genocide, and Sierra Leone after the civil war. It is from these examples that we take inspiration when we underscore the importance of reconciliation and in a range of post-war settings. In the Balkans, in Colombia, and between Ethiopia and Eritrea last month, to name but a few examples, and someday in Syria. Reconciliation gives us the hope of ultimately living as brothers and sisters once again. This may take generations, but we have to believe it is possible, and the world must stand ready to help. And in that spirit, I'd like to remind everyone that this year we remember the end of the First World War 100 years ago. And so, in closing, allow me to recall Atatürk's words in his moving tribute to the Australians and New Zealanders killed at Gallipoli during that conflict. Those heroes that shed their blood and lost their lives, you're lying now in the soil of a friendly country. Therefore, rest in peace. There is no difference between the Johnnies and the Mehmets to us when they lie side by side here in this country of ours. You, the mothers who set their sons away from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom, are in peace. After having lost their lives on these lands, they have become our sons as well. With that moving tribute, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to close this statement and allow us to move on to the more interactive parts of this session, where I hope we will be able to cover some of the subjects that I wasn't able to address because of our limited time. Thank you.
Foreign Minister, thank you very much. Please take a seat. Damn that traffic at the airport. It seems that it's going to mean we haven't got as much time as we thought we might have had. But let me come to you first of all. And then as a follow-up, I'll ask you, Mr. Cavusoglu, to react to what you hear here. The first question is, yesterday I chaired a panel which was about where the European Union goes from here. We're seeing a rise of populism, if you like, some form of fascism. We are seeing the United Kingdom saying that it wants to get out. Whether that happens or not, we will see, but I think it probably will. When it comes to the establishment and the future, and that's what we're talking about, of the European Union, do you see it as a peace project, Do you see it as an economic project? Do you see it as a currency project? What is the real purpose of the European Union?
It started as a peace project, and in its core it still is a peace project. I have parents that as children lived through the Second World War and recall personally and told me about their experiences of living through a war and seeing the Netherlands and Europe being rebuilt. And this was, of course, about the end of the war and creating peace, but also about seeing their daily lives improving, about seeing wine on the table for the first time in their lives, because it could be traded within the European Union. They had a childhood where nobody ever would use olive oil. They couldn't do without it anymore. So they saw their lives improving. They saw foreign countries coming closer. They were able to travel abroad. And this shows that what started as a peace project, European countries coming together, never to have a war again, through the way of economic integration, of trade, of the possibility to travel, made this peace very much part of everyday life. So to me, it is still a peace project.
So let me follow up with this one and then come to you, sir. Why, right now, are we seeing so many people, so many groups, Italy, Spain, Hungary, United Kingdom, your country as well, who appear to believe that the European project is flawed?
Of course, people are taking things that have been hardly won, taking for granted. They are taking peace for granted. They are taking economic prosperity for granted. So it is up to us as politicians to explain to them that those things can be lost again if we are not willing to fight for it, if we are not willing to convince voters the benefits of the European Union. This is not an important and not an impossible struggle. The majority of Dutch voters is still very much in favor of European cooperation. And they regret very much seeing our British friends leaving the European Union. So we have to continue to convince voters because it's worthwhile. And in my opinion, there is no better alternative.
Mr. Cavusoglu, sitting on the outside, perhaps wanting to be part of it at some point, is it scary to see what's happening with the European Union?
Not very scary, but I can say a source of concern for us, even though we are not a member, and we have been negotiating for many years. Yes, there are two organizations established, founded after the World War II as peace projects, and to unite European countries. Council of Europe, to unite the European countries along the values, core values, and European Union, that time different names, to unite the European countries, but particularly France and Germany, and economic interests. And today, of course, EU has to admit that many of its policies have been failed. Neighborhood policy, to my mind, this is my personal assessment, Euronest policy, and enlargement policy, and security policy. There is a dilemma because of NATO, and integration policy. All fail. Therefore, European Union should, I think, reform itself, because today's world and the European societies are different than the post-World War II era, first. And today, of course, Europe is facing some other challenges. I named some of them. And the extremist far-right political movements are gaining more support. This is a big challenge to my mind. And these trends have been undermining
not only the core values of the Europe, but also democratic institutions in Europe. Therefore, Europe should consider all this and reform itself. But overall, European Union should decide whether it should be a global power or only a small, just regional power. And then it will be much easier for the European Union.
And I think perhaps that is the great dilemma. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Perhaps the European Union, as it grows up, like most young people, young institutions, doesn't quite know what it's going to be in the future. But peace, cooperation, looking to the future. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Cavusoglu. Thank you very much, Mr. Blok. Thank you, and thank you for